Good evening, folks. We're about to get started, I think. Thanks for coming out to this is our last in our election primer series, I guess, where we've had, so far we've had the Peter Panashway, the Conservative candidate in, and Yvonne Jones, the Liberal candidate, was in, and tonight is your NDP candidate, Mr. Edward Rudkowski. And I just want to remind everybody that these are also being archived on YouTube, so if you happen to miss one of the earlier presentations, you can go on to the Labrador Institute YouTube channel and watch those. Oh, some sound problem. I'll fix that in just 1 second. Don't worry about that. The Liberal one's there as well, and Edward will be there as well. And I've shared it on the Labrador Institute Facebook channel as well. So you can all kinds of access to the links. Watch them all and make your choice for our election wisely, I guess. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Edward. I'm going to fix that when I get back there.
I'll wait till you fix it, and then I'll start.
It's only going to take me 1 second.
Yeah.
That just tells me that
It's
all working.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
No problem. Edward Rudkowski.
Boy, it's always I must say it's always nice to be back in Northwest River. I got lots of memories of walking down these streets when I was a kid, taking that cable car across with 25 cents in my pocket, looking for a Dave Michelin store.
You must be some old. Remember that cable car?
Oh yes, yeah, no, I am dating myself, but that's a legitimate memory, and I have remember that many times. Anyway, let me introduce myself for those of you who may not know me. My name is Edward Rudkowski, and I'm proud to say that I'm the federal NDP candidate in Labrador. For those who don't know my background, I was born in Labrador City, grew up in Wawash, and my mom spent many time in this community and across the river with my grandparents Cecil and Sylvia Blake. After going to high school in Wabash, I graduated high school, luckily, and was good enough to go away to university where I got an honors degree in economics and a master's of business administration. Subsequent to getting my MBA, I was hired into the banking industry, and the bank saw fit to transfer me here, there, and everywhere. And I spent a few years in Toronto and a few years in Sydney, Australia, back to Toronto, off to New York City for a couple of years, and back to Toronto, here, there, and everywhere. So for whatever reason, I managed to enjoy some degree of success in my professional career, and that's a success that I'm hoping to transpose here into political life. I've been asked many times, what's a guy like me and what's a person like me doing in this realm? This is a new situation for me. This is a new career path for me. You know, as I said, I've spent many years in the private sector, and I'm looking. And so, what brings me into the public sector? And it reminds me of a conversation I had many years ago with my mom in my mom's kitchen. And it reminds me of a saying that she said once, and I'm going to refer to that saying repeatedly over the course of tonight. And that saying, quite simply, is this: politicians are a dime a dozen, but leaders are rare. That's a comment that's always stuck in my head. And the same leadership skills that I use to excel in the private sector are the same leadership skills that I intend to bring to Labrador as MP for this fantastic riding. So let me talk about some of the things that we've been seeing out of the campaign trail. So as you know, we've been going through the longest campaign in Canadian history. The current campaign has been longer than the last two campaigns put together. So over the course of the past 11 weeks, we picked up a thing or two, or I'd like to think that we have anyway, about what's going on across Labrador. So I just want to talk about a couple of the things that I've seen and how I've witnessed. We've had a lot of people talk about mega projects. We've heard a lot of people talk about infrastructure. And we've heard a lot of people talk about Voisey's Bay and other such issues. And I'm not being dismissive of those issues. One of the things I do want to talk about, and I want to talk about now, are the things that we haven't talked about. I want to talk about the things that I've seen on the doorsteps. I want to talk about the things I've seen in people's living rooms. I want to talk about the things that, for whatever reason, have yet to gather people's attention. The first thing that comes to mind when I talk about missing issues is the issue of diabetes in First Nations communities. I was at Gull Island with the Inuit on 2 different occasions when they were having their muckashan. Muckashan is something I used to, myself and my cousin Vince used to attend when we were teenagers. And I had the privilege, honor, and pleasure of spending 2 days at the Muckleshoot with the Inuit at Gull Island recently. When I was at the Muckleshoot, I ran into a few ladies who were working with an Inuit Integrated Diabetes Initiative. Quite by fluke, quite by chance. Going from tent to tent, introducing myself, going tent to tent, gathering stories as I would in any other door knocking situations, and I encountered this group of women who were working on this initiative. Last week, I encountered the same group of women working in Natmashish. And the things that they told me were mind-boggling, staggering, scary, and disappointing. They told me that the incidence of diabetes in First Nations communities is upwards of 30%. That represents something in the magnitude of 6 times the national average. By any stretch of the imagination, that's a health epidemic of massive proportions. Yet we're not talking about it. I would feel a failure on my part if that was not one of the things I addressed tonight. Clearly, this is an unacceptable situation. People in Natmashish who are suffering from diabetes on that magnitude have no access to dialysis. There's no access to machines within the community to deal with their situation. Clearly, there's been a funding overlaps, and this has been a failure upon our politicians. Our politicians, these people, by and large, have been forgotten. They've been ignored, and they've been marginalized. As an MP for Labrador, I would assure you with every ounce of my heart that I would not allow that situation to persist. As I understand it, the visit to the communities by our current representation has been extremely spotty, and I'm being kind at saying spotty. If this health epidemic was at any other place in this country, there would be an outrage, and yet we're not hearing about it. We have lots of times to talk about railways going across Labrador. We have lots of times to talk about highways going here, there, and everywhere. But we have no time to talk about the fact that people are suffering, people are losing limbs, and we're not giving them assistance. So I wanted to bring that as part of the things I wanted to talk about, just to bring it to people's attention. Another thing which has caught some press, but I don't think has been sufficient, is the issue of housing on the North Coast. I was door knocking in Nain, I was door knocking in Hopedale. And one particular residence in Nain struck me hard. I walked into a gentleman's room, into his porch, opened the door and looked inside. And when I looked up and down the walls were the color of these chairs, they were black. And they were black with mold. My only thought in my head at that moment was, I hope to goodness that there's no kids living in this house. Because clearly it was an extremely unhealthy situation and one that was absolutely toxic to live in. When we hear of things like tuberculosis outbreaks, just to give you an example, my grandfather, my father's father, died of tuberculosis in 1937. 1937, that was an issue in Eastern Europe. This is 2015, and we have outbreaks of tuberculosis within our communities in Labrador and within our communities in Canada because of a housing situation. Clearly, we're failing somebody. Clearly, we're not doing enough. As a segue, one of the things that I would like to announce is, this was just announced today, by the way, and I'm reading up myself as we go along, is the NDP has committed to nation-to-nation relationships with Canada's First Nations and Aboriginal peoples. I'm going to read from her text because I just got it myself, quite frankly, just recently. This is an announcement that was made in Edmonton today. Speaking to the Assembly of First Nations today in Alberta, NDP leader Tom Mulcair made a powerful commitment to a new era of nation-to-nation relationships. I'm going to emphasize that word nation-to-nation because I think it speaks of respect. And one of the things that we can say about the current administration in Ottawa is that that current administration has not respected First Nation and Aboriginal communities in our country. As Labradorians, we should be outraged by that attitude. The statistics say that 44% of the people who reside in Labrador are of Aboriginal descent. That's a strong voting bloc. That's a strong bloc of people who cannot be ignored and I will not ignore myself. I'd be remiss in pointing out, if I didn't point out, I should say, that I'm also a Nunatsiavut beneficiary, and I'm proud to say that. So when people talk about housing crisis in any part of Labrador, it's something that strikes dear and true to my heart. I'm going to go back to my prepared text, I'm reading from. An NDP government is committed to addressing housing needs of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people, including Inuit and in the Nunatsiavut and Nunavik regions that have been excluded from federal housing programs and funding because of geography and not because of need. We will engage in meaningful dialogue with Inuit and Nunatsiavut and Nunavik to find ways to address their housing needs. My commitment as MP in Labrador would be to make it one of my top priorities, if not my top priority, to address the housing crisis that we have within our riding. The situation, when I talked to Jim Tutak in Hopedale, and he describes the multi-generations living in one roof. When I talked to Joe Dicker in Nain, and he talks about the same situation in Nain, unsustainable, unacceptable, and can no longer be allowed to persist. One of the other things I did want to touch on was going back to what I said before about leadership. I believe that we have suffered in this community, in this riding, and across Labrador because of a deficit of leadership. Many times throughout our history, we've had opportunities to stand up to other people and say, no, that's not correct. We have had opportunities in the House of Commons and the House of Assembly to do what's right, to stand up to outside interests. We failed to do so. We have a deficit crisis. The strange thing is that deficit crisis has existed since the time I was a kid. When I was a kid growing up in the streets of Wabash, when I came home at night, we talked about no roads. We couldn't drive in or out of the community, we didn't have any roads. Now we have some roads, but it took us 50 years to get what we got. The standards we have set for ourselves, we have allowed to be set for ourselves here in Labrador, are far below what anybody else in this country would deem acceptable. And we've failed to be strict enough and to be fervent enough and to be hard enough with people who do not want to give us what is naturally ours. We've seen failures of leadership in issues such as Bill C-51. Both the Liberals and Conservatives voted for a piece of legislation which has the power to limit people's freedom of speech. Our current MP had an opportunity to say that's not good enough. Our current MP had an opportunity to stand up to her leader, to stand up to her party, and to stand up for what was right, and she failed. And she failed. When the Nunatsiavut land claims agreement went to the House of Assembly for ratification, in the House of Assembly that day, there were 41 people in that House of Assembly. The vote count of that day was 40-1. 40 people unconditionally supported the ratification of the Labrador Inuit Land Claims Agreement. Only one person in the House of Assembly that day voted against that ratification. And unfortunately, that person was our most recent MP. Again, some could argue that she bowed to political pressures and chose not to support it. But I personally find it unacceptable when someone votes against a piece of legislation which has the power to better the lives of thousands of people within our own riding, within our own area, I should say. It wasn't her riding at the time. When you bow and when you don't stand up for what is right, you get run over. Back to what I was saying when I talked about leadership. In my belief, we have an infrastructure deficit, but most importantly and most critically, we have a leadership deficit. Without bragging, I'll tell you a little bit more about my story. I was in my professional career when I left university. I went from being the fetcher of the coffees. I went from being the guy who picked up the laundry and sent down around the corner to pick up the dry clean. That's where I started. That was my job. Hey, go get the stuff. That's what I did. And I did it because that's what I had to do. I went from being in that circumstance to a vice president of a major international institution within 5 years. And I did it because I'm the type, because I know how to get things done. When people say, Rudkowski, why should we vote for you? Why should we give you our support? Why should we give you our endorsement? And I tell them the same thing that I told every person who ever put me in a job interview. And what I told them is quite simple. And that line is what I just said a minute ago. I said, you should hire me. You should vote for me. You should support me because I'm the type of person that makes things happen. That was, again, that was my experience in private life, and that will be my experience in public life. I'm the only person on our slate of 3 candidates who's not an ex-MP. I'm not a career politician. This was a new game for me. I have a lot to learn. But I can tell you, without reservation or hesitation, that I'm committed to the betterment of Labrador. I'm committed to the betterment of Labradorians. That's a promise that I'm making to you here, and that's a promise I will make to every citizen of this riding. Now, my presentation has been a little light on policy, so I'm going to leave it there and open the floors up to your questions.
Thank you, Edward. And now he's agreed to answer anybody's questions. So let's have lots of questions for him. Got one back there for you.
Edward,
Hey.
my question is concerning Muskrat Falls, the hiring protocol over Muskrat Falls. We've been, I'm representative with the United States government, and we work with many elected officials on this process that they're supposed to be following over there. And believe you me, I know I get inboxes every day from constituents who work over there, who did work over there, and who's being replaced from people on the island. But yet, when you go to Stolly or an Alcor, and they're telling us that they're following the hiring protocol of, Labradorians, then Newfoundland, and elsewhere. But when constituents of mine get replaced within a day or two from somebody from BC who's coming here to make a friggin' sandwich or to swing a mop, when we got qualified janitors here in Labrador who's applied for these positions and not even getting an interview. I've talked to, like I said, I've talked to other elected officials and asked them, if elected, what could you do or what could you see to be done to make sure that this hiring protocol is followed?
No, that's a great question, and I can tell you, Roy, that's a conversation I've had many times over the past, of course, 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks. That topic has come up and up again. So let me just speak 2 seconds about my position on how this works out, and then I'll address the question. In my mind, Labrador is paying their environmental costs of this development. The lands that are being flooded are lands that my grandfather trapped for 30 or 40 years, right? Those are lands that people like many in this community, like my grandfather, relied upon for their sustenance, to support their families, and for their economic well-being. If we as Labradorians are going to pay that price, then we, by all means, should be reaping the majority of the economic benefits that come from that project, bar none. There is no argument against that. There is no 2 ifs, no excuses, ands, or buts about that, Roy, right? As you know, there are stipulations in the IBA that talk to hiring protocols. From what I can gather, there is no policing mechanism to look at those protocols. As MP, and I've put much thought about this, and I've had many discussions about this. As MP, I would assign someone within my office to deal exclusively with complaints about hiring practices in Muskrat Falls and other Labrador developments, and I would empower that person to escalate any issues that they found. I would, if there's no policing mechanism in place, I would put that policing mechanism within my office to put all hirers, all employers on alert that we're watching, and that we expect, and we will get the maximum number of Labradorians possible employed on projects like that.
We had that, like, similar situation in Boise,
Mhm.
but we have a monitor up there, and it's done well.
Mhm.
When we met with Premier Davis, he asked me a question. He said, "Well, what good would it do?" And I said, "Well, it worked well in Boise. Why can't you use it over at Muskrat?" In saying that, I like I said earlier, like I get constituents inbox me about how they're being treated. All Labradorians, not just my constituents. When I'm
Yeah.
speaking now, I'm speaking for all Labradorians, settlers, everybody. It's very discriminatory over there. And with the last protest that happened here, only goes to show that it is happening over there.
Mhm.
And it's still ongoing now.
Absolutely. No, I've had many conversations about lots of incidents, some which were reported, but many were not.
Yeah.
About how people are shunned, treated, talked about, ignored, and it's an ongoing issue. And listen, this is 2015. It wasn't acceptable 100 years ago. It's certainly not acceptable now. And again, Roy, my commitment to you is to ensure that someone, if need be from my office, will be in place to look at those, to monitor that exact situation.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Somebody must have another question.
Amy?
Sure.
I'm just wondering, when we talk about, housing conditions, housing crisis, health epidemics, how are we going to deal with third world communities in our territory, i.e. my community, Rudkowski being one of them?
Mhm.
The community has been classified by an epidemiologist who spent a lot of time in third world countries and third world communities. He collaborated with us on some research, and his first observation of my home community was, wow, this is a third world community.
Mhm.
This is also an Aboriginal community that has provided and contributed historically a great deal to Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people alike globally. What are we going to do about that? Because when I bring this to the table,
Mhm.
when there's a discussion about it, the buck is always being passed around to the point that myself, a fairly intelligible young woman,
Mhm.
would feasibly be able to understand who do I have to talk to to do something about this. And the conversation continues in the form of, they shock and hey, what's happened? Like someone got to do something. You're right, someone got to do something.
Mhm.
So who's going to do it? Because this is not just a community issue. This is an Aboriginal community issue. This is a human rights issue. And how is it that we look on a public stage allowing one of our Aboriginal communities to live in third world conditions?
No, listen, Amy, as you know, I spent 3 days pretty recently. 6 weeks ago, I spent 3 days in Black Tickle. It's not an eternity, but it certainly was enough to get a pretty good appreciation for what the situation that's going on there. In my view, and this is just my personal opinion, is that there's an unwritten, unseen, and unspoken policy of resettlement towards residents of Black Tickle. If we ignore them long enough, if we freeze them out long enough, if we deny them basic services long enough, they're going to go away. To me, that's been the unwritten policy. The thing about that we have to remember is that this is Canada, and politicians don't get to decide where you live. They don't get to decide where I live. They don't get to decide where Jim Learning lives. Politicians don't get to make that decision. Politicians have an obligation to provide for the well-being of every citizen under their purview, irrespective of where they live. And I think it's back to what I'm talking about leadership. This is where leadership has to come in. Leadership has to come in and demand better and to make sure that it gets done. And I know you have leaders within your own community. You have people like Laura Keefe and Joe Keefe who've been very vocal about getting things done in Black Tickle. And by and large, they've been ignored. Why? Because it's convenient to ignore it. It's easy, right? It makes if Black Tickle, for a lot of people, for a lot of politicians, if Black Tickle were gone tomorrow, their lives would be easy. But that's not the way it works in this country. That's not how Canada is founded upon. So it's time to start holding people's feet to the fire. And from what I understand, current representation hasn't been there either. And that's not the first time I've heard that story.
So are you saying you're committed to that community?
Absolutely, 100% I am. And I spent much time in that community, and I made that commitment to people then and there. Not my choice. It's not my choice where you live. I don't get to make that call. And because I don't get to make that call, you're not less of a citizen than anybody else. And the fact that we have, that the people in Black Tickle are probably within 20 days of running out of money for their water treatment plant, it's absolutely mind-boggling.
Which is ongoing, of course, it happens cyclically every year.
Every year, and the numbers we're talking, and just so people don't know, and people know, the numbers, the amount of money it costs to operate the water treatment plant in Black Tickle is between $20,000 and $30,000. That's it. And they were just turned down by the provincial government for a $30,000 grant for clean drinking water. And they were denied. Not big numbers, not big numbers, not big things. And someone said no to that. We got a problem. We got a problem. And the problem is not with the people, the problem is with the leadership. Yes, Roberta.
Oh, I'll ask my question in a little different format this time.
Absolutely.
Edward. One, do you think any party with 39% of the vote should get 100% of the power? Or do you think that if a party gets 39% of the vote, they should get 39% of the seats?
Well, I mean, that's quite fairly, and as you know, that's not how our system is structured. Our system is structured so that the party with the most seats gets to form government, right?
39%.
Well, that number could be different another time. Right? Okay, that number goes up and down. That's not a number that's set in stone.
That's right.
That's an incidental number.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Roberta, we have to make choices how our Constitution looks, and we have to make a decision saying, not every system is perfect, but what is probably the system that serves our country best? And when we look at the political stability that we've enjoyed in Canada, we can say, we're not a perfect country, far from it. We have lots of issues, but by and large, we're a country, by and large, where democracy reigns, and we're a country, by and large, where we have a political stability which allows us to move forward. When we look at Canada on the global stage versus most other countries, we typically rank top 10, top 15, something in that in terms of standard of living, in that range. Somewhere, I can't quote the exact figures off the top of my head, but by and large, versus most places, we're doing pretty well. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we have a stable political system. We're not in crisis, in our parliament every 2 months. We're not reforming governments every 8 months. By and large, it doesn't happen here in Canada. And that happens because of the political system that was set within our Constitution. Is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. Is it the best of all worlds, or is it the best sort of fit for what we need to do? I think so. So I can fully understand what you're saying, but for me as a person, and I understand that and this is my personal view, I'll stipulate that, because my personal view doesn't necessarily align with that of my party. But in my personal view, the system we have is flawed. I think it's the best system for moving forward.
But do you think that I think that across the country right now, a lot of people are saying, look, 60%, 61% of the people in this country didn't vote for our prime minister, and he's got a majority government.
But that happens in almost every. The numbers go up and the numbers go down, but that's a system.
That's the system. But
that's the system
like you said, it isn't perfect. Isn't it possible then that we could go to some form of proportional representation that wouldn't change the system that you enjoy and you think is good, because you just said it's not perfect. Couldn't it be possible that we could change to some better system then?
Listen, I can't sit here and sort of put a moratorium on any sort of constitutional discussions, right? That being said, that's not my area of expertise, and that's not what I'm skilled at. That being, I don't mean to be dismissive of what you're saying, Roberta, because what you're saying is valid, and there's a certain number of people who share that view. But when we have a laundry list of issues, some of the issues I talked about in terms of healthcare, in terms of environmental concerns, in terms of economy, you're the first person, and all my door knocking, I've door knocked all over this community for 11 weeks, you're the first person that's brought it up.
But you know
So,
what?
I mean, all that tells me, and again, I'm not being dismissive, I honestly respect your opinion and respect what you're saying. What I am saying, though, is that when it comes to the people of this riding, I don't think, in my view, I don't think that's on people's lips. And I'm not saying again, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not being dismissive of your
Maybe not
opinion.
this writing particularly because it hasn't been brought up before, but I know that in Ontario, they were very close when they voted the provincials. They voted very close to a proportional.
But what you're talking about is a federal amendment to our Constitution, and that is not a small process.
No.
Not being dismissive, not saying you're not right, not saying you're not entitled to your opinion.
Would you consider it?
Absolutely. Of course, I consider anything that makes sense. Absolutely. I can't be outright dismissive of anything that's brought to my attention.
I think it
I
needs.
mean, I don't have that level. I'm not smart enough to dismiss everyone that says something, of intelligence and insight. I'm not smart enough to do that.
Robin here?
Hi, Robin.
Hi. At the end of the day, which is October 19th.
Yes.
If the PCs have a minority,
Mhm.
Would your party and the Liberal Party consider working together to form some working together, as you would be representing likely the majority of the population?
If that was thought to be in the best interest of Canadians, I can't see a reason why it wouldn't be discussed. What I can tell you is that is almost certainly any sort of coalition with the Conservatives, right?
Sorry?
What is out is any sort of coalition with the Conservatives.
Oh,
That's what's
okay.
out.
Okay.
I think you misheard what I said.
Yeah.
Anyway, our policy is wait and see on that, and that's my policy as well. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
But if it's wait and see, how are you going to, on October 20th, know what the people want?
Well, the same as any other government does just after they've been elected. I mean, minority governments have been many, and we've always managed to soldier through it. The fact of the matter is I can't give you a pat answer on what on a what if scenario. What would we do on October 20th? That I can't say. What are the numbers? Who knows? But we're committed to working in the best interest of Canadians. That's not political claptrap. That's factual, and that's my commitment as well.
Do we have another question?
Edward, where do NDP stand when it comes to a five-wing goose fate? I'm sure, as you know, over the years now, we've seen a lot of demolition up there as well. One time, debate used when it was full swing, and now with all this demolition, there's more concern now of maybe shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I'm saying it's in people's heads, and so far I've never heard none of the federal politicians running mention five-wing goose fate.
Yeah. Okay. And we have talked about it, Roy. And our commitment to five-wing goose bait goes back to 2013 when we had a violation. We issued a press release at that time. So let me just talk about what my thoughts on five-wing goose bait are. And I had a very good conversation 2-3 nights ago.
Wait, no, can I interrupt for a second?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm asking what are your parties staying on it?
Yep.
Not just yours.
No.
And I don't mean this ignorantly, but
No. And
I want to know where Mulcair is coming from as well.
Yeah. So let me because we're one in the same mind on this regard. So let me talk about that. So as I was about to say there, I had a very good conversation with some leadership on the base a couple of days ago. What's needed at five-wing before and until you identify this one thing, until you identify an operational requirement, you have to give the base a raison d'etre. You have to get a base a reason to be there. And until you identify that core issue, the rest is just politics. Okay. So luckily there is a reason for that base to be there. Luckily there is an operational requirement. And that operational requirement in my mind extends to search and rescue capabilities. As you know, and without naming names or particular incidents, we've had a multitude of situations here in Labrador where people's lives have been jeopardized and people's lives have been lost because of an insufficient search and rescue capability at that base. There's some talk that they want to centralize more search and rescue capabilities in Gander. If you're in the water on a boat off Hopedale and you got to wait for someone to come from Gander, you're in a bit of bother. You're absolutely in a bit of bother. As Labradorians, we enjoy going into the country. My grandfather did it. I did it as a kid. Lots of people do it. Lots of people love going to their cabins, going up on the CS on Skidoo, as the case may be. There is an absolute need for enhanced search and rescue capability at 5 Goose Bay. And when you talk about an enhanced search and rescue capability, that gives the base the operational requirement. Once you have an operational requirement for the base, then you have something to build on. Then you have something that the base has to be here for a reason, and based upon that, then you can sell it as a training base for exercises, what the case may have. But the starting point for any discussions on 5 Goose Bay is to develop an operational requirement, and that's when search and rescue functionality comes in. And people who dance around that and don't talk about that core issue of operational requirement are not being straightened out.
We have some more questions from the audience here. I have one question from an online viewer, if you're
Yes,
interested
absolutely.
in that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So it's from Denise Cole.
Yes.
And Denise would like to, when it comes to Labrador governance, some people in Labrador would like to be our own territory. Where do you stand on this?
That's something, okay? Again, that's an issue that has come up almost, I'll say seldom in my journeys. And after being on the road for 11 weeks and crossing almost every door, or not every door, almost in doors in almost every community, that's an issue that has not come up a bit. I know it's a back burner issue. I know it's an issue which has been simmering along there since the days of Tom Burgess and the New Labrador Party. My view on it is that we don't talk about that until we exhaust other possibilities first. Right? We haven't given some people a try yet. If we were to say an NDP government would be forward, and we have an NDP member, and that didn't work out, then we've exhausted possibilities. Then at that point, we've exhausted possibilities. To me, that is a sort of last ditch. And I don't mean it to be disrespectful, but that's the last step in a process to make sure that you get what's coming to you. That movement, in my mind, is driven by a resentment. It's driven by an anger because of the deficit of resources coming in versus the expense of resources going out. We have and have had for decades a gross imbalance between the amount of dollars being produced here and the dollars being spent here. There's been a huge gap in that regard for decades. That gap has led to the frustration, led to the talk, that's why the New Labrador Party was formed in the first place, because people are pretty ticked off, and rightfully so, to be frank with you. So with the new government, we have an opportunity within the current context to address that gap. Should that fail, then I think that at that point we can go further down that road. But I think it's premature, in my view, at this point.
Another question?
Yeah.
Jeez.
I'll ask you.
Goodness. Yeah. This is free country. Go ahead. Sorry.
This spring, the municipal government beneficiaries in Upper Lake Melville had the migratory spring bird harvest, known in 12E, rights taken away from them because of the 9-year sunsetting clause.
Yes.
That was passed down through the federal government.
Yes.
Federal Minister of Environment at the time. If elected, what could you, or say, okay, your whole party, do to help beneficiaries in Upper Lake Melville to see that this right is returned back to us?
That one, Roy, I'm going to defer, and I'm not being, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I'm going to defer. We've already had a conversation between myself, yourself, and Patricia some time ago. Subsequent to that conversation, I did make some phone calls to see what our scientists or what people who give us advice in those environmental causes thought about that process. All right, and I'm going to wait till I get some information before I make an official position on that one, because there's some people who said, some people who say springtime harvest is may not be optimal, and there's other people who say, well, it's our First Nations or Aboriginal right to do so. So
Okay, well, can I put it in a different form then?
yes, you go right ahead.
Would you be willing to work with the municipal
Absolutely.
government?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I think Edward's done a great job of answering everybody's questions. I appreciate your time coming out tonight. And
My pleasure.
now all our responsibilities are to take the information from the last 3 presentations and make a informed decision on the 19th, and then live with our choices.
If I just make one statement, this is politically neutral, by the way. We had a debate on CBC Labrador Morning this morning. That debate is available as a podcast. If people have other questions or concerns, in addition to Scott's fine work, of course, people can go and see the Labrador Morning podcast, and that gives people an additional opportunity to hear what we had to say.
And I understand there's a debate in Wabush as
And
well.
there is a debate in Labrador City on the 14th. I don't know yet if that's going to be publicly broadcast yet.
I think on their Facebook page for the debate, it says that it'll be live streamed.
Then you know more than me, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, then you know more than I do.
Well, thank you for coming
All right,
out, and
thank you,
thanks for
thanks for-
everybody
thank you,
coming to
everybody.
watch too.
Really?
She said, I do it.
But I'm right into it.
I'm new to this game, right? So I'm fumbling in the dark.
I get that.